chose Sigma Chi because the first group of guys we had, the objective was to get the best fraternity we could that would match up with the characteristics that we wanted. And one of the guys, Kramer Scarborough, had been a pledge of Sigma Chi and knew a lot about it and knew the high ideals and the high standards. And when he laid it out, it was almost like a foregone conclusion. We were fortunate that Kramer Scarborough had been a SIG down in Norfolk somewhere. I'm not quite sure what school it was. And then later, Bill Bresnahan, as Butch said, who had been a SIG at Miami. Kramer had been a pledge. He knew a lot and helped a lot. Those two guys were really instrumental in us putting together a constitution, our objectives, some of the really serious things. We got established on the campus in the January of '65. In '64 is when we first had our first meetings. And after we got established, I think it was Bill Bresnahan and maybe Kramer Scarborough that approached Sigma Chi. At that time, they didn't have a colonizing system, and you had to establish yourself as a local fraternity, financially, socially, academically, for them to review you and accept you. So it was relatively soon afterwards, but it was a long time, I think almost 4 years before we were able to meet the high standards of Sigma Chi.
We were fortunate when right when the guys started the fraternity in '64. Bill Bresnahan turned out to be our second or third president in about 4 months. He was a Sigma Chi from the University of Miami, Florida. And when we sat down to write our first ritual, we didn't know how much was coming from the Sigma Chi ritual until we saw our first ritual. But a lot of it, Bresnahan kind of guided us to go in this direction and that direction. And we had some of the own ritual that we ended up writing on our own, and coming up with a grip and what this meant and that meant, and we had to take we had our own crest, and I don't know who designed the crest.
That probably was
Phil Jones again.
Yeah, Phil
we were lucky to have. We had some really talented guys. Phil Jones, Sonny Watson, Richard Higdon. We had some. Butch Galloway.
I think the strongest thing that we had then, and that we've had over the years, and hopefully that we'll have for the years to come, is the bonds of brotherhood. That's the main thing. Without the bonds of brotherhood, you got a club, and Sigma Chi, Zeta, Omega, and Alpha was much more than just a club.
The beginning in 1965, Richard Higdon and I had an apartment down on Pine Street, and Richard had joined Sigma Chi Alpha, and I hadn't. And we had, Sigma Chi Alpha had their first ever rush party at our apartment. And we had probably 7 or 8 guys, or they had 7 or 8 guys show up. And out of that 7 or 8 guys, we got no pledges or nobody really interested. And
they were interested in drinking the beer.
They left as quick as the beer was gone, yeah. And after that party, everybody was pretty well trashed, so was the apartment. So Higdon and I had to move out. And we moved down on Lynn Street, and that's when I joined Sigma Chi Alpha. And this was before we'd just been recognized by the university. And so the fraternity grew by 1 member since we were formed in '64, and I was it. And so that led us up to the fall quarter, and that's when we, without a house or anything, we had rush parties at Dr. Preese's house and on campus. We actually had 7 actives, and we pledged 21 pledges that fall, and 7 of them went active. Well, actually, the first pin was a cross, and it had a slash in it. It was a white cross, and it had a gold slash in it, and it distinguished between Sigma Chi and Sigma Chi Alpha, the slash did. Balfour came back and said, you guys can't use that because it resembles the Sigma Chi active pen. So what we did, we redesigned, and I think, Skinny Bryant?
No, it was Phil Jones.
Phil Jones.
Phil Jones was the one
Came
who
up,
designed that.
and we made half of the top half of the badge white and the bottom half blue. That's what the first pledge class got. Now, the active pen, we sat down and we came up with a blue background, and I think there's 3 symbols on it. First group that we initiated, the 7, I was supposed to pen Bill Schmidt that night, and I lost my pen in the snow going over to the Episcopal church where we did the initiation. So I was pinned to turned out to be my wife, so I had to go up and get her pen to come back to be able to pin Schmidt. So it's a pretty exciting night for not only for the new guys, but we doubled our active chapter that night.
Dr. Prees was very instrumental in helping us out. One of the strongest guys that helped us was Harold Dillenbeck. He was a professor at the university, and he was our first advisor that we ended up having. He also was instrumental in us obtaining our second house. Our first house was down on Walnut Street. When did we get that? 66?
Yeah.
1966. And it was literally, if you've heard the proverbial rat hole, it was a rat hole. Burlington Industries had a plant up above it, and there was a little creek that came back behind us, and each morning we'd wake up to see whether it was going to be dyed turquoise or pink or blue or orange. We worked our tails off getting that house in shape because we needed it as a place not only for our guys to live, but also to have parties and all that. That was the first house. And then Dillenbeck got really involved with us. And anyhow, he helped us get the house on Seminole, which was a much nicer house. We were able to put more people in it. It was much more conducive to rushing and entertaining, and it was that was kind of a major step.
The potential to be a Sigma Chi, I think we got a lot of second and third looks. And then we did judge a lot of people by the Sigma Chi, the Jordan standard, because we knew if we ever went national Sigma Chi, that they had to be a person of character. We were always told by Fred Yoder when he would come in to check on us from time to time. Fred Yoder was he was an advisor for Sigma Chi, and he's the one that we first contacted and first got to know, and he later turned out to be the editor of the Sigma Chi magazine. They never patted us on the back and said, you got it made. We didn't know it until the day that we were initiated. Really, we put a lot of time and money, and there was some guys that really put a lot of time, Barry and Rusty, putting the application to go national, and getting the letters from the Dean Thomas and all the deans on campus. I don't know how they went to school and did all this for us to go national. University of Tennessee, the Beta Sigs, they were very supportive, but the Sigma Chi chapter at the University of Chattanooga came up and did our initiation.
Even though when we started out it was a hodgepodge of young, I was green, I didn't know a fraternity from a rock. Young guy, sophomore, but some of these other guys were a little older, and we had some guys that were more mature. And if you look back at those guys that started out at the initial 21, that some of those were not just freshmen hunting a big wild party place. We had some guys that were pretty mature, and I think they realized that our fraternity was maybe a little more mature than some of the other fraternities on campus. And I think that helped us. The whole thing kind of evolved over time. It's a fantastic experience.
Richard Higdon and I were from La Follette, Tennessee, and then we were probably the only two that was from the same hometown that I can remember. Butch being from Gatlinburg, he brought in the Gatlinburg bunch. Richard and I brought in the La Follette bunch. We had 4 or 5 guys come in from La Follette. You had 4 or 5 from Gatlinburg.
Okay, yeah.
And then we that's how we drew people to us. They knew us from our hometown. And then I think, like, when Bill Schmidt pledged, his brother had been a Sigma Chi, and Bill had been a Sigma Chi up at Wisconsin. He was a pledge in Wisconsin, and he was in the first pledge group. And we knew when Bill came that we were getting some character and some knowledge that would later, not only we didn't call it council or magister, we called him pledge trainer, we called him president, vice president. We didn't want to be Sigma Chi. We wanted to be Sigma Chi, but we had to be real careful because a lot of people would drop the alpha. A lot of people would call us Sigma Chi, and we did a lot of correcting back then because we didn't want anybody to think we were already Sigma Chi when we didn't go national. We were very, very careful. But Schmidt turned out to be, he was a president of Sigma Chi Alpha, and he was in the Navy Reserve, and we used to kid him a lot, and we called him Admiral. And lo and behold, about 7 years ago, he retired as Rear Admiral Schmidt. And very, very proud of Bill. Talked to him probably twice a week. We were a strong knit group.
Everybody had different things that they did. We had some strong jocks that were pretty good in lots of different sports. We had some guys that were not so good. We were talking as we were coming in today about Butch and I participating because we showed up and everything when we were trying to get on campus, we never shirked out and didn't do something. We always at least participated. And Butch and I, we ran 2 of the 4 legs on a 440. Now, that's saying something because it was a question of which one of us was going to
come in last
or croak. I mean, just neither one of us, as you can tell. I was a little thinner then, but what you call lightning when it came to doing the running. And I picked up my first shot put to compete in the competition when we were competing with the other Greeks at the, I don't know, it was a Greek day or whatever. And I said,
track and field.
I came in next to last. I was pretty proud of that. Unfortunately, the last guy was another Sigma Chi Alpha. And, but I mean, the point is, it shows we always showed up, we always participated, and I think we gained a lot of respect from the other fraternities and sororities on campus, that we were always there and willing to do what each of us had to do to get the job done. We had some guys, like we were talking about Phil Jones, that were very creative, that could do, design crests and that kind of stuff. We had athletes. We had some people that were pretty religious. We had a hodgepodge of talents.
Both David Hubbs and Louis Hankins were showmen.
Yep.
Hankins, if he didn't have it, he'd go buy it. We needed carpet. Hankins just went out and bought new carpet and put in the house. And Hubbs could hustle anybody. I mean, he was a hustler. He was quite the athlete, the jock. He could play football, basketball, baseball, anything.
To this day, usually when we come into town for a golf tournament or for initiation or whatever, you'll always find a couple of brothers will go down there for a burger and a beer.
Well, Sammy took care of us.
Yep, he did.
Big time. I mean, like we were talking, we'd go in there and say, Sammy, you cash a $30 check, and can you hold it for 3 weeks? And you go in there 4 or 5 weeks later, and Sammy pull the check out and say, can I run it through? Oh yeah, man, run it through quick, because I'm about broke again. Or we'd get ready to we'd want some beer to go out to the river. There was a place we used to go hang out at the river because we didn't have any money to rent a place. We'd go by the Apex, and he'd give us a keg of beer for $16. That's 16 gallons, $1 a gallon. Or if he was going, we was going to have a heavy date to the drive-in, we'd pull up there and get 2 cheeseburgers for 45 cents or 90 cents for 2. And we had a milk jug, and he'd sell us a gallon of milk beer for $1. I mean, for $1.90, you had a gallon of beer and 2 cheeseburgers.
You know, I hesitate to use the term sacrifices. Obviously, I think Butch said a while ago, we weren't the wealthiest fraternity around. In fact, I can remember probably early on, and half of the brothers and that were there were working to get enough money to be able to pay their dues. I'm sure various people smuggle in a beer once in a while, but when we usually got together, we were down at the Apex. We'd go down to the Apex, we'd get a beer and go out and go to the lake or whatever, but we didn't bring it in the house. And I don't remember a lot of people. I mean, we'd have parties and you'd get people that get a little bit more than they should have, but we didn't have problems with drinking at the house or coming back and being abusive to nobody I knew of on drugs, but on alcohol either. And it didn't hurt us. We always had a good time. I went to graduate school, and I was a house mom or a house dad, whatever you want to call it, over on Seminole Drive for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And the better part of a year anyhow. And we just didn't drink in the house, and I didn't approve of it. Schmidt didn't approve of it when he was there, and we just didn't do it. So that was a sacrifice, but it was a positive one.
Sherry she was a local Johnson City gal, which turned out to be a huge plus, because she would have us over to her mom and dad's house. We had pizza over there and beer, and we could socialize, and just a true gal that I think she loved all of us. She was a good student. She was very attractive, and
A lot of class.
And very recognizable.
A lot of
yes.
class, yeah. Carried herself
Yes.
extremely well.
And she was a plus for the fraternity. She'd come to rush party. She wouldn't miss a rush party for anything.
And our next sweetheart was the same way, Lynn Molson.
Lynn Molson.
She was also, she was number one. She was the first one. Sherry followed her. But both of them were real assets to the fraternity. I don't think we ever compromised our standards for the people that we wanted in and that we let in and that became actives. And I think back, maybe it wasn't a smart move, but I remember we had Skeeter Swift, which people around here might not know him now, but he was a little All-American basketball player in high school from up in Virginia, and he's still got some records here in East Tennessee. And he was one of my little brothers for a while. And Skeeter, as much as I really liked him, I think he won a little favoritism just because he was such an outstanding jock. And as the fraternity, as the active brothers, we said no, he's got to do the same stuff and meet the same standards that everybody else does.
Yeah, he went on to play pro basketball for the New Orleans in the ABA. And we went to him. We said, you either get up to par with your pledge brothers, or maybe you ought to look at it. And I think he did join another fraternity that gave him a free ride. But we kept going back to the Sigma Chi concept, the Jordan Standard. We used the Sigma Chi pledge book. In fact, I've still got the original pledge book that we got. And we set that standard, and we probably turned down or didn't give people, men a second shot, because we just didn't think they could grow up from being a freshman to a senior and fit the Jordan standard. I think the fellows that we pledged and they became active. Everybody that we pledged and went active had a role, and we could see them in that role later on. Not that we were that smart, it was just we were very, very lucky in the people that we chose. And when we sat down after rush parties, we would go over every name, just like we would just really talk and go and think, and we got into a lot of hard arguments about different people. And but I think all in all, the first 4 years, we just had to be so careful about who we did pledge to make sure that, hey, in 4 years they would still be there working, because we knew we'd graduate. We went National Sigma Chi just right before Butch graduated from graduate school, and right before I graduated. So we knew we were turning the fraternity over to a bunch of great guys that would keep the tradition going, and it's still going. The tradition from Sigma Chi Alpha, it's been a long, hard road, and all of it's been us. And I think it all came from the foundation that the Galloways, the Higdons, the Garners, the Ferrises, the Waddells, the Schmidts. The foundation was put in place.
And the Rains.
Well, I was just.
And right now, a great part of the strength they have right now is the alumni that are helping get this thing back strong on its feet.
You know, the sacrifice. Yeah, we sacrificed. We could have been, you know, with another fraternity and not had to work to do what we did. But it was a lot of hard work that I enjoyed every minute of it. And I was fortunate enough that the gal that I ended up marrying, she was very instrumental in being part of Sigma Chi Alpha as Butch's first wife and Barry's Jersey. You know, we just had a lot of good women behind us too. You know, Sigma Chi's need a lot of love, and we got it. You know, we thrive on love, and we certainly couldn't do it with our money, because none of us had money.
Well, it's a trite expression and it's overused, but I really believe that we personify the old philosophy that you get out of it what you put into it. And I can tell you this, I've gotten more out of this than I think I ever put in it.
We had one major challenge, and that was how do we collect or generate an incremental $2,500 for the petition that we need to provide Sigma Chi. And remember, that may not sound like a lot of money now, but at that point in time you could buy Budweiser for 25 cents and gas for 25 cents a gallon. So $2,500 was a large amount of money. And we had several brainstorming sessions, and finally Tom Joins came up with the idea of creating a coupon book. And we were all assigned different retailers. I went out and persuaded them to discount their goods, and then once we aligned them, we went to students and sold them. We raised the money, and that was our biggest obstacle. The other thing I would tell you is that most people don't remember is the 22 actives, undergraduate actives, that were actually pledged by Sigma Chi on April 30th, 1969. So we did have a pledgeship that was pretty intense, study halls and things like that.
Immediately after going national, we attended a workshop in Colorado, and we really got raked over the coals by some of these guys from national. And the reason we got raked over the coals was we had concentrated on the goal But then once we met that goal, we didn't really have everything set up within the chapter to do a good job going forward. And they pointed that out to us pretty dramatically and pretty severely. And it wasn't one of these pep talks where they tear you down and build you up. They tore us down and then left us there. And that really left a big impression with me for the year going forward, that we need to do more things internally as far as scholarship and as far as connections with the university and connections with the campus in general. And I think it was Ben Adams or somebody else that attended that meeting years later, and it never dawned on me, said, you know, I think they do that to every new chapter so that you don't sit on your laurels once you go national.
Well, I would say that the real thing that attracted me to Sigma Chi Alpha was the challenge that they described to me of creating a national Sigma Chi chapter. I was familiar with Sigma Chi, and obviously that was a dream to become a Sigma Chi. The key players there at the time for me were Butch Galloway and Butch Raines. Now, nearly 45 years later, they're still they have been my best friends for a long time, including Rusty. So it's been a great experience.
Yeah, I'll have to echo that. There were a number of individual characters. Louis Hankins, who was a very colorful fella in college. I first met Louis, and he was selling Gantt shirts out of the back of his car. How he came about them, I don't know, but these were shirts that were probably $4 or $5 at retail at that point, and he's selling them out of the back of his car for 75 cents. The other thing that most people don't remember, particularly younger people, was you couldn't get a bottle of liquor in Johnson City at that time, and Louis would organize these runs over to Abington to the liquor stores, and they would only sell a certain amount of liquor to any one individual. So he'd take a car full of guys over there, and they would each buy the maximum that you could buy, take orders from people back on campus, and Louis would make enough money off making these runs to pay for his gas at 25 cents a gallon, but also enough liquor to get him through the weekend. But it was these guys' innovation and creativity, I think, that really helped the chapter. And it was not only their help in running the chapter in their own individual ways, but also their individual personalities and rush that helped attract people because we weren't sanitized, we weren't all the same.
I think really the work that original active group, 7 actives, did to attract 21 pledges during that first rush period was pretty incredible. And I think it should be noted that they did 2 things very smartly. The first one was they did create a vision of what they wanted to achieve and how being a small fraternity at that point was a real advantage in terms of people getting in and taking leadership roles, whether it be an officer or just doing the work, which was terrific. And secondly, they did a great job of leveraging the alumni in this area. Dr. Prees, I remember we had one of the rush parties over at Johnson City Country Club, which was, for a country boy like me, pretty impressive. So I think that was critical. They were very smart about that first rush. And we had some successful rushes after that. And Rusty will remember this. He was, I think, probably a freshman or sophomore during this period. Is that the rush period when we got Ben Adams and that group of 20-some additional pledges, those 2 were kind of the catalyst groups of large number recruits that drove us for a number of years forward.
People like David Dake, who's now deceased,
Yep.
Jody Muse, who unfortunately is now deceased. In my mind, the fraternity really took off after I graduated. We did okay until that point. We certainly went national. That was our focus, and we achieved our goal. But the fraternity really took off and really started doing well in the early 70s. I got out in 70, Barry got out in 69. But it was after that the fraternity really started to grow, not only in numbers, but also in the overall quality of how they were viewed outside of just the Greek system and just outside of our own group. I think the early 70s, the mid 70s, Yank, when you were here, fraternity was really on top of the world.
I think that's interesting because it's really a case of changing the perspective of what's important. Because for 4 years for sure, the whole focus was on going national. Did we want to have fun? Yes. Did we want to get engaged in campus, which we did very aggressively? Yes. But it was a finite focus against one thing, Once that was achieved under Rusty's leadership and Jody and then Ben, they could really focus on how to really now drive a chapter that was unsurpassed at East Tennessee. It's kind of a different focus, if you will, and it worked. I'm proud to be a Zeta Omega for a number of reasons. One, being lucky enough to be consul when we went national was one of the most enriching experiences I've ever had in my life. Secondly, I've made some lifelong friends that have been important to my life in a number of different ways. And third, I would say, just when you're on an airplane and you're wearing your Sigma Chi ring, you get recognized and you feel proud when you talk to people about it. I'd like to acknowledge that Harold Dillon Beck was one of the key drivers to helping us achieve our goal of going national. He visited every Sigma Chi chapter in Tennessee with us. He kept us on the straight and narrow. He helped us establish goals. We used his house for a lot of activities, and without him, I'm pretty confident there wouldn't be a Sigma Chi chapter here at East Tennessee. So I think it's important to recognize his contributions to Zeta Omega.
He was a professor at the university who had been a Sigma Chi, who was a Sigma Chi from Purdue, I believe it was, and he did a tremendous amount of work along with a number of our members in acquiring housing for us. Louis Hankins, again, I think played a big role in that. So that without this help from outside people, we would have had a much more difficult time getting recognized and getting out there, so to speak.
Before I talk about my involvement with Sigma Chi Alpha, I look back at the Founding Fathers, and although the 7 folks were equals, there was one that was the Founding Father, and that was Byron Shotwell Galloway. And he was one that approached me and said, "Hey, come and join. We need you to be a part of the first pledge class." Now, it was fortunate for me because I had had Sigma Chi in my blood previously. I had been a pledge at another university, and then I did not go active. Then I transferred to East Tennessee State. I could have easily gone to a different fraternity as a legacy, and a fraternity that I knew well. But I got wind of the fact that here were 7 gentlemen that were trying to start a new fraternity, and it was Sigma Chi. And I beamed. It was the greatest thing that came to my ears in a long time, because I had that excitement that was built as a previous Sigma Chi pledge. So I was more than eager to be in the first pledge class. One of my disappointments is that I graduated before the chapter went national, and therefore the Zeta Omega part was not something that was really ingrained. I came back in 1970 along with another Alpha, David Tretler, and we both went through initiation together. So we were sort of dipped into the Zeta Omega, but our bonds really kept going back to the Alpha. Sigma Chi made such an impression on me, and I think it played a significant role in my later successes, what I learned and took away from being part of the organization. I wanted to give something back. And I thought long and hard about, well, what could that be? And I was young, I was in the Navy. We were in the Western Pacific and the Philippines, where relatively inexpensive, you could get hand carvings. And I had a picture of the cross. I think it came from the magazine. And I found a gent, and I says, "Can you make me one of these about that high and about that wide?" He said, "Sure." I said, "I'll be back in a couple of months, and I'll pick it up." Most beautiful thing I ever saw. I wish I had one made for myself, but I only had him make one. So I gave that to the fraternity. I'm not sure whether I mailed it or brought it back when I went active. And it's been hanging in the house ever since. And it gives me a great deal of pride to know that that was my one little give back. Obviously, you want to give back a lot, but that was my one little piece that still exists, and I'm very proud of it, as I think all the brothers that followed me are equally proud of it. I think all of us were focused. We had a goal. We knew it was going to be a struggle. We worked hard. We played pretty hard on the sides a little bit. And I think as the years evolved, as proven when the local chapter was brought into the national organization, that by golly, we achieved that goal. There was another gent, he was one of the founders, Bill Bresnahan. He had been a Sigma Chi at another school. And it's funny, as I was traveling around in my Navy career, I guess in the early 80s, I had an opportunity to be in Palm Springs with the individual I was working for. And President Gerald Ford had retired from the presidency out in Palm Springs. I had no idea that Bill Bresnahan had joined the Secret Service. And as my boss and the President Ford met, who was at his side but Bill Bresnahan, a fraternity brother of mine. He was on Gerald Ford's detail out there. And we had a great time reminiscing about people and who had we followed and who was still around. The bond that was developed in those early days has carried with all of us. And I hope that as other groups have passed through the experience, that their groups have remained as close as the Alphas. The Rains, the Ferris, the Galloway, of course, Waddell, Hewlett Cheney, Trenham, Trotter. I mean, these are names that you'll never forget. You can go back and tell stories about all of them, as they can tell stories about all of us. But I don't think I could tell you more than 3 people that I graduated from East Tennessee State University that weren't Sigma Chi's or Sigma Chi Alphas. That's how much it meant to me. My boss was Ronald Reagan. I was his naval aide for his first 2 years in office, and President Reagan used to go out to Palm Springs every New Year's to the Annenberg estate. Annenberg was a TV guide background, and the two got together to play golf, and that's when Bill Bresnahan and I, while the presidents were playing golf, we were talking about Sigma Chi. Dean Thomas was one of the greatest individuals that I knew as a part of the administration, and he was absolutely terrific in helping Sigma Chi Alpha get off the ground and pursue our dream. I can remember when we moved into the fraternity house, Hal Dillenbeck's house. He called me up and says, you got to have a house mother. And I says, we can't afford a house mother. You know that. And he said, well, we got a problem. And I says, let me be the solution to the problem. I will volunteer to play the role as the house mother. And I promise you that we will stay on the straight and narrow. There won't be any difficulties. Nothing will get out of hand. And he had so much confidence in our organization that he says, okay, let's give it a try. And when I left Sigma Chi Alpha as a graduate, we still didn't have a house mother because somebody else had come in to fulfill those roles. I did not succeed as a house mother. The brothers made me successful as a house mother because they knew I was in a position. I think it could have been anybody doing that job, and they would have been successful because of the brotherhood.
No, you're wrong. We couldn't have. We couldn't have been successful without you as a house mother. You were a wonder. You were the best house mother we ever had.
It's really an honor, actually beyond words, to tell you the significance of being one of the first 2 significant SIGs from Zeta Omega. I don't think it had anything to do with me personally. I think it was the brotherhood that, for whatever reason, nominated me. I feel fortunate that my name was included among the 125 or so gentlemen that were acknowledged this year. So the honor is not mine. The honor goes back to the chapter, to the willingness to try to move some names forward, to have a legacy in Zeta Omega that, yes, we too, just like the big universities, can have a couple of people that are singled out as being successful in our careers, although many brothers were equally successful in theirs. I could name 5 people that could be sitting in this chair right now as one of the first significant SIGs of Zeta Omega. Lightning struck me, and that was thanks to the Brotherhood. It gives me great pride to be a Sigma Chi, especially a Zeta Omega Sigma Chi. It instilled in me a desire to succeed, because that was our goal early on. We wanted to be successful. It taught me how to be a team player. It taught me how to be a leader. And I hope to this day, and I'm sure that the traditions of the fraternity remain steadfast, in that one of its goals is to continue to teach teamwork, continue to teach leadership. As I've said a couple of times, everybody in the organization ought to be striving to lead that organization. I was fortunate to be a consul. Many other consuls have come before and after me. That is significant, and that helped me become a significant SIG.
Well, I'd gone to UT my freshman year and had some guys on the floor I was living in to do the fraternity thing, and that really didn't sit right with me, the way they had been treated there at UT. So I came back here my sophomore year and really didn't get in that scene. Still played intramurals with a bunch of guys I went to high school with, but then I got an opportunity between my junior and senior year to actually work at North American Rayon in Elizabethton over the summer with some Kai. We started, and they said, "Hey, come hang out with us on a Thursday night, ladies' night." And the next thing you know, they said, "Hey, instead of trying to drive home at night, why don't you just stay at the house?" Next thing you know, they said, "Hey, it's only $50 a month to live here." And so I got a room over the summer and just got to meet more and more Sigma Chi's. And my older brother Mike had been affiliated with Sigma Chi here. Good group of guys. We talked a lot about what Sigma Chi stood for even before Rush came about in the fall of my senior year. And I never went to a Rush party at any other fraternity. It was Sigma Chi alone. We had probably 70 actives at the time, very strong, winning Petersons and winning lots of stuff on campus, except for all singing, that kind of stuff. Never. But obviously in the sports we were pretty active. We were sound financially, and even holding our own on the grade standpoint. So, well, Lance Ritchie was the one I was working with at the time and brought me over here. He was very instrumental. Steve Finney was another Carter County guy that we would hang out in the summertime as well. And then I got to meet Greg McIntosh, who became my Magister, and they were probably the 3 influential people. And then really a bond with Kyle Fugit, because he went into the Army as well. Though I had a brief time here at ETSU and Zeta Omega, it's still a bond that I've kept throughout my life. I'd been in engineering at UT, and obviously here at ETSU we didn't have an engineering program, so I really went into getting a math degree simply because that's where all my credits would transfer over to. So I got to be my fall semester my senior year, is probably October, November time frame, and I woke up one morning going, "Hey, you've got to get a job. It looks like you're going to graduate." So I thought about it. I'd been an Air Force brat, and I went to my father and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to go do the Air Force thing for 4 years." And that's what I did. Didn't know what I wanted to do in the Air Force. I was too blind to fly. So I got into intelligence and haven't looked back. That's 27 years ago. Sort of a family affair with us and Sigma Chi. My older brother was here for a while. And that's really, I think, what got me to thinking about Sigma Chi. I think it was always in the back of my mind to go do that. And certainly my younger brother Matt is done well more in terms of community service for Elizabethton as a school board chairman there, and certainly as a chapter advisor here at Zeta Omega. And under his tutelage as a chapter advisor, they won 5 Petersons, and that's a phenomenal record that he had as a chapter advisor, and he's really the servant leader of the family. My relationship with Greg McIntosh, the Magister, was probably a little different because we were both seniors, and with Kyle Fugate, the consul, we were all 3 seniors. We were all 3 going to go into the military. So while I was just the pledge, there were times at parties and things that I was able to take on a leadership role. The bond that I had with Kyle and Greg really setting us up for our leadership opportunities in the military, I would remember fondly.
Military travel.
Well, I'll give you one good story. I was a young lieutenant in my first squadron as an intelligence officer, and I stepped into a situation where my predecessor didn't have a great relationship with the pilots, and it's always a tough relationship between the intelligence officers and the pilots at times. And my squadron commander, who ended up becoming a 4-star general, and my boss, my intelligence boss, did not get along at all. And I was struggling to how to make that work. And we had a squadron picnic, and I happened to wear my Sigma Chi football jersey. He immediately came up to me and shook my hand, and he was, "I did not know you were a Sig." And from that moment on, my relationship with him totally changed, and I saw more respect from him out of that, and I ended up working for him later when he was a 1-star general. And when I made colonel, he sent me all the way, he was in, I think he was in Korea at the time, sent me a personal letter all the way from Korea. It is amazing as I've gone through either meeting Sigma Chi's or and talking about fraternities with other officers, and when I tell them I'm a Sigma Chi, they take notice, and the look on their face many times is like, wow, impressive. So it's been a humbling experience. I know the Admiral and I have just been in awe, and as we said last night, it's really, we're just representatives of the great men that are Sigma Chi at Zeta Omega. I'm truly proud to be a Zeta Omega Sigma Chi because it's been about different temperaments, talents, and convictions, and bringing guys together that may not have associated otherwise, and to really grasp onto a common ideal or a common need, whether it's a philanthropic endeavor or just brotherhood, and watching guys that may not have associated with each other just to pull together and have a great bond of brotherhood.
No!